Well, thanks for watching Market Day Report. Good morning. I'm Suzanne Alexander. Thanks for staying with us. Well, the Pro Farmer Crop Tour now in its third day as scouts continue their journey across the Corn Belt to measure yield potential. And doing a great job for us, Ted Seifried with Zaner Ag Hedge joins us once again for a boots on the ground update. Ted, thanks for checking in with us. And I know got a little rain right now, but yesterday was beautiful in Nebraska. So a little recap of yesterday and how things went.
Yeah, actually, when we talked yesterday, we had been seeing some really good corn when we were just getting out of Grand Island and about halfway to our Nebraska City stop. But then, shortly after we talked, we started getting into some much rougher areas once we got east of Wahoo, and we saw our yield samples start to decline it really very sharply the closer that we got to Nebraska City. So the end results that we saw last night, you had Nebraska corn, Pro Farmers putting it at 158.3. That compares to a 182.35 last year, 176.68 on their 3-year average. That's down 13% and 10% respectively. So it wasn't a great number for Nebraska, although yesterday helped that number come up a bit from what we saw on day one in Nebraska. It's still a pretty significant decline from what we've seen last year and the previous few years. Now, the USDA is somewhat accounted for that. I think the Pro Farmer numbers are likely suggesting that the USDA probably has to come down a little bit further. But the USDA isn't going to be completely surprised by what they're going to see in Nebraska. At least that's the thought. As far as soybeans are concerned, pod count came in at 1,063.7. That's compared to 1,226.4 last year and 245 average. So that's down 13.3% from last year and 14.6% average. Also not really very good. And the big thing that we talk about in soybeans is that when we look at pod count, we're talking about potential. Pod count and yield don't always have a very strong relationship. Obviously, the higher the pod count, the better potential you have to yield. What we were saying is that the soybeans in Nebraska weren't really that bad, but they needed to get some rain really very soon in order to fill out and actually produce those bigger yields. And if they don't get that rain fairly soon, those numbers could be coming down pretty aggressively. So we'll be watching the weather in Nebraska for the next 10 days really very closely. And then the eastern leg on Indiana, their corn, they came in at 177.85. That compares to 193.5 last year, which was the best number we've seen in Indiana last year. And that's a 178.3 average. So we're down 8.1% from last year and down 0.2% on average. For soybeans, pod count came in at 1,166 compared to 1,240 last year. 1,148 on average. That's down 5.9% and down 1.5% respectively. So both of those numbers coming in a bit low. The Indiana number, I think, was the bigger surprise. After day one in Nebraska, I think we knew the Nebraska number was going to be down pretty sharply. And in fact, I'm going to say it wasn't down quite as sharply as what we had originally been thinking when we were coming to the end of day one. But the Indiana number coming in a bit lower than what I think we were all really expecting. So overall, what we've been seeing is a crop that's been coming in lower than expected. Now, today, I'm currently standing just outside of Lakeview, Iowa. We left this morning in Nebraska City, quickly crossed over into the Iowa, and my route started taking samples just north of Omaha. And what we saw at first was really very good. Our average through 7 stops right now is a little over 200 bushel for corn. And that's a little bit down from what we were seeing last year, but it's really still a pretty solid number. Now, we are just now starting to get into some tougher things. This is an ear that I just pulled from the field here in front of me. Mm-hmm. You can see by these jagged rows that you've had some issues during pollination. And that is not what you really want to see. Now, this is still a pretty good ear. You can also see that kernel depth is really still pretty solid. So we are still coming up with some pretty decent numbers, but they are steadily starting to decline. And we are starting to see a bit more of that dryness pop up as we travel a little bit further north. The one thing that I will say about the corn that we had seen earlier, and to some extent the soybeans as well, is that a lot of the pressure and a lot of the potential to get to where they were last year had been kind of robbed by a lot of weed pressure, really stealing a lot of that moisture. If it wasn't for that, I think they would have had the moisture to get very close to last year. But again, a lot of weed pressure this year, again, taking away some of that moisture from the corn.
Thanks, Ed. When do you wrap up today, by the way, before I let you go?
Yeah, so we end up in Spencer, Iowa. That is the western leg of the tour. The eastern leg of the tour also in Iowa. They're going to wrap up in Iowa City, Iowa. So, we have our meetings tonight. But really, the thing about this is the big day for the tour. We always want to know what's going on in Iowa. And between the two legs, we hit every county in the state of Iowa.
All right, Ted, thank you so much. Of course, we look forward to getting a wrap up tomorrow again. That's Ted Seifried with Zaner Ag Hedge. Again, appreciate you calling us and giving us that boots on the ground update. Stay dry out there, by the way. And of course, like I said, a final update from Ted tomorrow, right here, 1 p.m. Eastern on the Market Day Report.